A millionaire marries a rebellious girl on a bet, then finds out on their first night she's a virgin. It was late at night. The lights of New York City stretched across the skyline like constellations glowing beneath the earth. From the top floor of a modern glass skyscraper, inside a luxurious penthouse, Adrian Wolfe stood silently in front of the wide glass window, holding a glass of amber-colored whiskey. His eyes stayed fixed on the brightly lit streets, but his mind wandered back to a time long gone. Back then, everything had seemed perfect. Adrian lived a life of relentless success, fame, fortune, and influence. Born into a distinguished family, he was raised with both affection and high expectations. To him, love had once been sacred, a bond both beautiful and eternal. He had loved with everything he had, trusting entirely in the woman he believed would be his forever, Vanessa Lane. But that trust had become the very blade that cut him the deepest. Adrian could never forget the moment his life changed, the day he stepped into their shared apartment and found Vanessa in the arms of another man. Not just any man, but his fiercest competitor in the industry. Every sweet word, every heartfelt promise had been nothing but tools to get close, to use him. From that moment on, love became a luxury to Adrian, a dangerous game he had no interest in playing. He locked his heart away, choosing instead to operate with precision, control, and unshakable reason. His life now revolved around multi-million-dollar deals, strategic mergers, and the steady expansion of his global hotel empire, where emotions were locked behind cold glass walls. Yet, no matter how successful he became, no matter how calm his exterior appeared, tonight, as the city quieted and the lights softened, memories surged back, uninvited. Vanessa's face, that deceitful smile, and the bitter taste of his own foolishness. He took a sip of whiskey, letting the burn trail down his throat like a cruel reminder. Trust is the most dangerous thing in the world. And love? Love was something Adrian Wolfe would never allow himself to fall into again. That evening, the Waldorf Astoria gleamed under crystal chandeliers, with classical music drifting gently through the air. The gala had gathered New York's most powerful figures, investors, designers, politicians, and elite socialites. But for Adrian Wolfe, it was nothing more than strategy. He didn't come to enjoy himself. He came to maintain dominance in a world he'd already conquered. Standing beside him was Julian Reed, his longtime friend from university, now a successful venture capitalist. Always dapper with a touch of sarcasm, Julian took a sip of champagne and gave Adrian a sideways glance. "Are you planning to wear that stoic expression all night?" he teased. "At least pretend you're enjoying this." Adrian swirled the whiskey in his glass, his voice deep and indifferent. "I enjoy it in my own way." Julian smirked, letting his eyes scan the room until they settled at the far end of the hall, where a group of women were laughing. Among them stood one who clearly didn't care for the attention. Chestnut hair, piercing ocean blue eyes, and an air of reckless confidence. "Sienna Blake," Julian said slowly, as if savoring the name. "Heiress to Blake & Co. fashion empire. The tabloids call her society's wildfire. Untamed, unpredictable, impossible to control." Adrian glanced briefly, his face unreadable. "So?" Julian's smirk deepened. "I bet you can't turn her into a proper lady in 3 months." Adrian set his glass down. A hint of a smirk flickered on his lips, not amusement, but the thrill of a challenge. "And if I do?" $2 million, Julian replied without hesitation. "Cash?" In a world where emotions were calculated like stocks, Adrian no longer knew what it meant to feel. But the bet intrigued him. Sienna Blake was nothing more than a pawn, another move in his ever-growing empire. He didn't need love, just control. And if he won, it would prove there was nothing beyond his reach. "Deal," Adrian said with finality, his gaze drifting toward where Sienna stood, unaware that this simple bet would turn his world upside down. Across the hall, Sienna met his stare, cool, unflinching, proud. She was no stranger to whispers or judgmental glances. As the only daughter of a prestigious yet emotionally barren family, she had learned to use rebellion as her armor. She knew her father was pushing her into marriage with an aging tycoon in exchange for a lucrative deal. But when Adrian Wolf's eyes met hers, something shifted. Maybe, just maybe, this man was her way out. A loveless marriage with the city's coldest CEO could be her only escape from a life she never chose. The bet had been made. But behind that single handshake between two men lay deeper intentions than anyone could predict. For Adrian, it was merely an experiment, a thrilling challenge. For Sienna, it was her last chance to take control of her own life, even if only for 3 months. 1 week later, they sat across from each other, bathed in twilight and bound by a cold contract, where the game would officially begin. A week after the gala, Adrian Wolf's penthouse was once again cloaked in its usual eerie stillness. The fading light of dusk filtered through thick drapes, casting a soft amber hue across the room, warm in color, cold in feeling. On the glass coffee table lay a neatly arranged marriage contract, every clause typed with legal precision, leaving no room for interpretation. Sienna Blake entered with an air of nonchalance, one hand tucked in her pocket, the other holding a steaming cup of coffee. Clad in a silk blazer and fitted leather pants, she looked like someone who didn't play by anyone's rules, but always won. Her eyes swept over Adrian, already seated, as though she were evaluating an expensive acquisition. "So we're really doing this?" she asked, her voice light but laced with irony. Adrian looked up, meeting her gaze with calm indifference. "If you still want to avoid the marriage your father arranged, this is your best option." Sienna stepped closer, setting her cup down, her eyes unwavering. 3 months. What do I get after that?" "A sum large enough for you to never depend on anyone again," Adrian replied without flinching. She let out a soft laugh. "Are you always this charming, or just with women? I don't waste time dressing up the truth." A beat of silence passed. Sienna sat down, picked up the pen. Her gaze paused on the signature line of the contract, her lips curling into a knowing smirk. "Then we have a deal." She signed, Sienna Blake, every stroke sharp and deliberate, just like her. Adrian watched the signature form, feeling like he'd just locked in a game he was destined to win. But what he didn't realize was this game wasn't as simple as he believed, and the piece he thought was just a pawn might end up being the one thing he could never control. The penthouse fell silent again after Sienna set the pen down. Adrian rose, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt as if he had just closed another business deal. He turned away, but not before letting his gaze fall one more time on her signature. Sharp, deliberate, fearless. A part of him felt intrigued. Across from him, Sienna leaned back in the chair, legs crossed with quiet defiance. To her, Adrian was no different from every other cold, powerful man who thought money could buy obedience, even from her. She had worn masks long enough to master the art of duality. And this time, she'd play the perfect role too, the temporary wife, composed and refined until she could find her way out. Two minds, each with a plan, each wearing a mask. Neither trusted the other, and both were determined never to show weakness. Each believed they were using the other for their own gain. But neither knew that the game ahead wouldn't be played with logic. It would be played with emotions they thought they had buried long ago. Sienna heard every word, the venomous whispers, the judgmental stares, the sideways glances soaked in mockery. But she kept walking, back straight, chin lifted, as if none of it could touch her. Every step down the white aisle was another nail in the coffin of the perfect bride image she wore so effortlessly. She played the role with flawless precision. Their marriage became instant tabloid gold, a private, stoic CEO marrying a reckless heiress known more for scandal than grace. Two worlds that should have never touched, now bound together by a single piece of paper. No one knew that, behind the flashbulbs, Sienna was quietly asking herself, "Am I selling myself short? Or is this the only way to finally live on my own terms?" Right after the wedding, Sienna moved into the Wolf Estate, a grand mansion by the Hudson River where everything operated with cold perfection. The silence was so pristine, it felt unnatural. Stone walls, endless hallways lined with priceless oil paintings, it all made her feel like she had just stepped into a polished golden cage. Breakfast was served at 7 a.m. sharp, afternoon tea at 4:30, napkins folded into exact squares. The staff bowed to her with the same hollow expression. But the most unsettling part was Adrian. He didn't raise his voice. One glance from him was enough to make the staff obey. He lived by the clock, disciplined, emotionless, and so composed that Sienna sometimes felt she was living with a walking machine, flawless and heartless. So she started breaking the rules. She came home at 2 a.m., still in her evening gown, heels in hand, hair undone, wearing a mischievous grin. The next morning, her photo appeared on 3 tabloid covers for speeding down Madison Avenue. Every time she strutted into the dining room like a storm, waiting for Adrian's reaction. But he said nothing. He would glance briefly at the paper, then fold it and set it aside as if it didn't matter. That, somehow, irritated her more than any lecture ever could. She wanted him to react, to lose control. But Adrian remained still, like everything she did was already factored into his calculations. One evening, she passed by the library in a silk nightgown, deliberately. He was working under the soft glow of a desk lamp, face tilted, expression unreadable. She slowed down, paused, waiting for him to lift his eyes. He didn't. "Don't you plan on controlling your wife?" she asked, voice barely a whisper. Adrian turned a page, his voice calm. "I don't control adults. They make choices. They live with the consequences." Sienna froze, not because of the words, but because of how coldly they were spoken. Precise, detached, leaving no space for emotion. She turned away, but something stirred quietly inside her. Perhaps for the first time, she'd met someone she couldn't provoke. And that made her uneasy in ways she didn't expect. But amidst the rebellion and the long silences, Adrian began to notice something even Sienna didn't see in herself. A side hidden deep beneath the armor of defiance. As time passed, despite the ongoing silence and subtle clashes, Adrian began to notice the small things. The things that never made the headlines. The parts of Sienna that existed far beneath the glamorous surface and sharp tongue. One evening, returning to his home office earlier than usual, he found himself pausing by the kitchen door. The lights were still on. Curious, he stepped closer. Through the small crack in the door, Adrian saw Sienna standing across from Mrs. Latham, the long-serving housekeeper who had worked for the Wolf family for nearly 2 decades. "This is for your son's tuition this year," Sienna whispered, sliding an envelope discreetly into her hands. "But don't say it came from me, okay? I don't do thank yous." The housekeeper's eyes welled up, lips trembling, but Sienna simply smiled, stepped back, and walked away as if it meant nothing. Adrian stood frozen behind the door, silent, unseen. A few days later, he overheard her speaking to the estate manager, arranging to donate hundreds of warm coats and shoes to a children's shelter on the outskirts of the city. All under the name of a friend who wishes to remain anonymous. Then came another night. While inspecting a new hotel site, Adrian spotted Sienna's car parked on a rundown street deep in the South Side, far from where people like them usually ventured. He got out of his car and watched from a distance. Sienna was distributing food and blankets to the homeless. She crouched down to speak with them, no makeup, no pretense. Her ocean blue eyes held real empathy. She didn't know he was there. She didn't need anyone to see. For the first time in years, something shifted inside Adrian. He had been so quick to label her a reckless puppet. But the woman in front of him, hidden beneath society's judgment, was someone else entirely. She didn't crave recognition. She didn't seek applause. Sienna helped quietly, as if kindness was embedded in her bones, not as a strategy, but as a truth. And that unsettled Adrian. She was no longer just a piece in his bet. She had become a mystery he wanted to understand, not to control, but to know. As the walls slowly began to fall, moments of calm started to bloom between them. Wordless, effortless, simply presence. And in that stillness, neither of them felt quite so alone anymore. After silently watching her for weeks, Adrian began to shift. He wasn't sure when it happened, but at some point, his gaze stopped passing over Sienna like part of the arrangement. He started noticing the small things, the way she sat for hours by the window, pencil in hand, sketching scenes of New York bathed in nightlights. Simple drawings, filled with emotion no words could express. At first he observed from afar, but one evening he quietly sat beside her. They didn't speak, just sat there, watching the city flicker beneath them. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was calming, as if the world outside had briefly paused. Sienna felt it too. Adrian's gaze had softened, not cold, not calculating. It was the look of someone seeing her, truly, for the first time. And strangely, she no longer felt the urge to rebel. They began to share pieces of their past, cautiously, quietly. Sienna spoke of her mother, a gentle woman taken too soon, leaving her in the hands of an ambitious stepmother and a distant father. Adrian, for the first time in years, spoke of Vanessa, of how he loved her blindly and how her betrayal shattered everything he believed in. It wasn't grand or poetic. It was honest. And in that honesty, they found a sliver of something real. One afternoon, Adrian entered the library after a grueling meeting and found Sienna reading a book on economics, something he never thought she'd be interested in. She mumbled to herself, if they invested in social housing, the long-term cost would drop dramatically. He smiled quietly, saying nothing, just watched her like he was discovering a new world. Their dinners became lighter. Sienna teased the chef's plating, flicked peas across her plate, and Adrian, instead of scolding her, found himself staying longer, watching her instead of checking his watch. Then came a moonlit walk in the garden. Sienna pointed to each flower, explaining its meaning and why it mattered. Adrian listened, not because he understood, but because for once, he wanted to. A sudden downpour surprised them. They ran under the porch, drenched. Sienna laughed freely, hair soaked, arms outstretched. "Don't you find this exciting?" she beamed. Adrian looked at her, voice quieter than usual, honest in a way that startled even him. "Maybe. This is the first time I've found something truly beautiful." Sienna's heart skipped. In that moment, beneath the rain, something shifted, softly, undeniably. It wasn't the rain Adrian found beautiful, not the moonlit garden or the wind rustling through the leaves. It was her smile. Sienna laughed, unrestrained, unguarded, not like a rebellious heiress, but like a girl simply happy in a fleeting, innocent moment. Her arms stretched out to the sky, catching raindrops like a child. Her soaked hair clung to her cheeks, and her eyes shimmered under the porch light with a brightness that left Adrian breathless. His heart stirred, a foreign sensation he thought he had buried long ago. This wasn't a game, not a plan, not a victory. It was just her. That was the first time Adrian found her truly beautiful, not the kind of beauty born from scandal or elegance, but the beauty of a free spirit, glowing in her raw, unfiltered self. Just as the space between Adrian and Sienna was finally softening, filled with real moments and quiet understanding, the past crept back in like a shadow, threatening to pull them apart once more. It happened on a gray afternoon. Sienna was lounging in the living room, a glass of red wine in hand, staring blankly out at the overcast sky. The door opened without warning. Clarice, her stepmother, entered with that all-too-familiar smile. Sweet on the surface, venomous underneath. "I'm not here to lecture you," Clarice said softly, placing a thick envelope on the table. "I just think you deserve to know the truth before you start dreaming too big." Sienna didn't reply. She reached for the envelope, opened it slowly, and her heart clenched. Photos, dozens of them. Adrian seated across from Vanessa in an upscale restaurant, his gaze warm. Vanessa leaning on his shoulder, fingers resting lightly on his wrist. Close, intimate, familiar. 1,000 doubts came rushing in. Why had Adrian been coming home so late lately? Why had he gone quiet again, just when she thought he was opening up? Was all the gentleness just part of the game? Clarice rose, brushing her hand across Sienna's shoulder with faux sympathy. "Don't let yourself become pitiful, dear. He's always chosen her. You're just..." A pause. No tears. No reaction. Just the tightening of her grip around the wine glass until her knuckles turned white. Sienna gave a faint, hollow smile. "You should leave. I've seen enough of your performance for today." Though she told Clarice she didn't believe her, the emptiness left in the room afterward made it hard for Sienna to breathe. She had tried so hard to believe that Adrian was opening up, that the soft looks, the quiet moments, the rare honesty weren't just figments of her imagination. But those photographs, Adrian and Vanessa, unmistakably close, haunted her like a silent verdict. She was nothing more than a temporary replacement. So she began to withdraw. No more light-hearted questions at dinner. No more garden walks or sketches by the window. She retreated behind the mask she knew best, cold, indifferent, untouchable. Adrian noticed the shift, but he didn't ask, and she, drowning in silence, let the distance grow. She told herself she didn't care, that this was always just a contract. But deep down, the part that hurt the most was knowing she had allowed herself to hope, and now she was paying the price for that weakness. And while Sienna drowned in doubt, she had no idea that Adrian was fighting a different kind of war, one not against his feelings, but against an enemy threatening everything he worked to build and protect. A few days after the encounter with Clarice, Sienna found herself at a quiet cafe downtown, the kind of place she used to escape to when the world felt too loud. She sat in the corner, slowly stirring her cappuccino, eyes vacant as she watched the blur of strangers rushing by outside. At a nearby table, 3 men in suits, Wolf employees, were deep in a tense conversation. She hadn't intended to eavesdrop, but when one of them said Adrian's name, her focus snapped. "If we don't secure new investment this week, the West Side project is dead. The financials are worse than what the reports show. He's been sleeping at the office 3 nights straight, trying to find a way out." Sienna froze. Her body tensed, her breath caught. So that's why he had been so distant. The missed dinners, the blank stares, the silence. It wasn't about Vanessa. It wasn't about her not mattering enough. It was because he was fighting a storm, alone. Images flooded her mind, his exhausted eyes, the late-night phone calls, the untouched coffee cups left on his desk. Sienna left the cafe with heavy steps, as if each stride crushed the illusions she had clung to for too long. She had blamed him for being cold, for being distant, for not caring enough. But now, with all the pieces falling into place, she understood. Adrian hadn't pulled away because he didn't love her. He had done so because the weight on his shoulders left no room for fragility. He was carrying a crumbling empire. He was protecting his people. And somehow, he was still trying to hold her close, even when she kept pushing him away with doubt, silence, and walls built from old wounds. Guilt flooded her chest. She remembered the exhaustion in his eyes whenever he came home late. The times he looked at her but said nothing, not out of apathy, but because he didn't know how to say what he felt. She had been wrong to think silence meant indifference. Wrong to let a few photographs twist her heart. Wrong to believe she was the only one hurting. Now she saw the truth more clearly than ever. Adrian was fighting alone, not for himself, but for those he loved. And she was one of them. That night, Sienna returned to Whitmore Manor without a word. She didn't look for Adrian, nor did she wait for him to come home. Instead, she went straight to the library, the same quiet space where her mother used to sit and read every afternoon. Tucked into the corner of the top shelf was a small iron box, worn, old, and untouched. Inside were documents detailing her mother's inheritance, a fortune she had never touched, her unspoken promise to the past. Sienna sat down, hands trembling slightly as she opened the lid. That money had always been sacred to her, a symbol of love, of memory, of something that once was unconditional. But now she realized love, if never given, is nothing more than a lingering regret. And Adrian. He was the first person she had ever wanted to give it all to without needing anything in return. She called her private lawyer immediately. "I want to transfer a discrete investment into Wolf Corporation." "Are you sure? This amount could set you for life. You'd never need anyone." "I've never been more sure." Her voice was soft but unwavering. No tears, no hesitation. Just a woman, finally choosing to believe in love without guarantees. She didn't tell Adrian. She knew he would refuse, but she didn't need his approval. Because for the first time, she wasn't fighting to be loved. She was fighting to protect the one she loved. The next morning, in the Wolf boardroom, Adrian stood frozen as news broke of a mysterious investment that had saved the company from collapse. He didn't know who had done it, but something deep in his gut whispered, it was her. The next morning, an emergency board meeting was called at Wolf headquarters. Senior executives packed into the room, tension thick after days of uncertainty. Then the news dropped like thunder in clear skies. An anonymous investment just hit our main development fund. It's enough to keep our projects alive for at least 6 months. Adrian froze. He grabbed the financial report. The transfer came from a private trust. No name, no ID. Just one final code, one that struck like lightning. S. Elcott Private Trust. Elcott, Sienna's former surname. His heart raced. No, she wouldn't, not after everything he'd put her through. But memory flooded in. Her distant silence, her strange calm, the walls she'd quietly built around herself. Adrian called George, his assistant, and demanded every detail. When the document copies landed on his desk, the truth could no longer be denied. Sienna had saved his company. She hadn't told him. She hadn't asked for thanks. She hadn't even needed him to know. All his life, Adrian believed success came from calculation and control. But now, in this moment, only one thing mattered. Trust. Sienna trusted him, believed in him without needing proof or promises. And she chose to act quietly, fiercely, while he stood still. Adrian's chest tightened, emotions surging through him like a tidal wave. Everything he had carefully built, the icy distance, the perfect facade, was beginning to crack. All because of one woman, one silent sacrifice, one undeniable love. Vanessa was spiraling. When she found out Sienna had been the one to save Adrian's company, not one of the strategic partners she had tried to bring in, her rage turned blinding. Consumed by jealousy and the sting of failure, Vanessa hired someone to stage a car accident, just to scare Sienna, just to make her retreat. But things got out of hand. A truck slammed into the side of Sienna's car on a rainy night, flipping it into the guardrail. Glass shattered. Blood stained the pavement. She was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Adrian got the call mid-meeting. He didn't think. He didn't breathe. He ran, and when he saw her, pale, still, her body hooked up to cold, blinking machines, his entire world crumbled. He dropped to her bedside, grabbing her lifeless hand. "Please, don't leave me. I was too late, but I'm here now. Just wake up, Sienna." "I never said it, but I love you. I've loved you for so long. I just didn't have the courage to admit it." Then the door creaked open. George entered, a thick file in hand. "Adrian, you need to see this." He opened the documents, investment records, transaction histories, all pointing back to one anonymous trust, S. Elcott Private Trust. Adrian's heart stopped. The woman lying there, the one who had asked for nothing, had saved everything. She had loved him in silence while he had nearly lost her. Determined, Adrian ordered George to launch a full investigation. Traffic camera footage revealed a black car tailing Sienna minutes before the crash. Rental documents, signatures, everything pointed to one person. Vanessa. There was no more doubt. Adrian handed all the evidence to the authorities. That same night, police stormed Vanessa's penthouse. She didn't have time to react before the cuffs were on. "You'd really do this to me?" she screamed. "I once loved you," Adrian replied, his voice cold. "But you destroyed everything, including yourself." Vanessa was arrested for attempted grievous bodily harm and corporate sabotage. She would finally face the justice she tried so hard to avoid. That night, Adrian returned to the hospital. He sat beside Sienna once more. But this time, the look in his eyes wasn't distance. It was raw, open vulnerability. "I don't deserve you, Sienna, but if you wake up, I'll spend every breath proving you never loved the wrong man." For the first time in his life, Adrian was no longer sure of anything. Numbers, deals, deadlines, none of it mattered anymore if the woman lying before him never woke up again. He had once believed he could control everything, but now all he wanted, all he needed, was to see Sienna open her eyes, smile, and say his name. Amid the dim hospital lights and the hum of cold machines, Adrian finally understood what it meant to feel helpless. When a heart truly loves. That early morning, soft sunlight streamed through the hospital window, gently resting on Sienna's pale face. She still lay motionless, while Adrian sat silently beside her, holding her hand as if it were the last thread connecting him to hope. Suddenly, her eyelids stirred. A faint flutter, then slowly opened. Adrian froze. When her eyes finally met his, the entire world seemed to pause. "Adrian?" she whispered weakly. "I'm here. I never left." He leaned closer, his voice trembling. "You scared me more than I've ever been." Sienna tried to smile, but her lips barely moved, as if even that small effort cost her everything. "I'm okay. Just a bit tired." "You were crazy to do everything on your own. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I knew you wouldn't accept it. I just wanted to help. I didn't care whether you loved me or not." "But I loved you. I've loved you for so long." Adrian went quiet. His eyes glistened. "I used to think love was just a cruel game, but you changed everything. You weren't part of the plan. You became the only thing I wanted to fight for." From his pocket, he pulled out a small red velvet box. No grand gestures, no crowd, just truth. "The first time I proposed, it was a bet, and I regret every second of it." He opened the box, hands trembling slightly. "But this time, it's real. No games, no contracts, just me asking you to be mine, because I love you." Sienna covered her mouth, tears falling freely. I thought I was just a temporary choice in your life. No, he shook his head. You're my only choice. She nodded, choked with emotion. Yes, I will. Adrian slid the ring onto her finger, then wrapped her in his arms, tight, like he never wanted to let her go again. Months later, at a major charity event hosted by Sienna herself, she stood on stage in an elegant white gown. No longer the rebellious girl from before, but a strong, independent woman, full of purpose. I used to be someone who didn't believe in love. I thought I didn't deserve it. But I learned that only when we learn to love ourselves can we truly open our hearts to others. I made mistakes, but I'm lucky. Someone never gave up on me, even when I gave up on myself. At the back of the hall, Adrian smiled, not just because she was his fiancée, but because she had become the best version of herself. That night, in the small garden behind their estate, beneath a sky full of stars, Sienna and Adrian stood close. She rested her head on his shoulder while he wrapped his arms around her in quiet serenity. We've been through a lot, haven't we? Yeah, Adrian whispered, but all of it brought me here, to you. They kissed, slowly, tenderly, like a vow only their hearts could hear. No spotlight, no applause, just two wounded souls who had finally found home in each other. A journey of wounds, growth, and at last, healing. The evening breeze whispered through the garden trees, carrying with it a soft, calming peace. Above them, the stars sparkled gently, as if blessing two souls who had fought their way back to each other. Sienna looked up at the night sky, her fingers still interlocked with Adrian's. Do you think we'll change? No, he said softly, eyes warm. We won't change. We'll just become better. She let out a soft laugh, the sound drifting into the stillness of the night. I don't know what the future holds, but I know, if you're beside me, I won't be afraid of anything. And neither will I. Adrian tightened his grip. We'll keep writing this story, one page at a time, whether it's quiet or stormy. They didn't promise perfection, only that they'd never let go, no matter what came their way. Because now they understood. Love isn't a destination, it's a journey, and on that journey, all that matters is having someone to walk it with.